Nobody at that dinner table moved when it happened, not when the tray crashed, not when the glass shattered, not when 40 of Korea's elite sat in complete silence and let a man humiliate a woman in their presence. And that silence told Madam Lee everything she needed to know about her grandson and exactly what she needed to do about it. What she did next would detonate that family from the inside, and Amina, the woman they all ignored, would be holding the match. The wine hit him before anyone saw it coming. One moment, the crystal glass was upright. The next, a dark red river was spreading across Min-Jae's white suit jacket, soaking through the fabric in real time, right there in front of 40 of Seoul's most powerful people. The entire dining room went silent. Min-Jae looked down. Then he looked up. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his gaze to the person holding the tray. Amina stood perfectly still, her dark eyes steady, her breathing controlled. She hadn't flinched. She didn't apologize immediately. And somehow, that stillness made everything worse. Min-Jae's voice dropped low, the kind of low that's more dangerous than shouting. He pushed back from the table. Do you have any idea what this jacket costs? I'm sorry, sir. Her voice was calm. Not shaking. Calm. That calmness seemed to snap something inside him. He slapped the tray out of her hands. The crash of silver and glass against marble exploded through the room like a gunshot. Guests lurched backward. A woman gasped. Two of the other maids rushed forward instinctively, then froze, unsure what to do. Amina didn't move. She looked at the broken glass around her feet, then back up at Min-Jae. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize again. She just looked at him with those steady eyes, and in them was something he couldn't name, something that felt uncomfortably close to pity. Min-Jae opened his mouth to say something else. Min-Jae. The voice came from the staircase. Every head turned. Madam Lee stood at the top of the stairs in her ivory evening robe, one hand resting lightly on the banister. She was 73 years old and barely 5 feet tall, but the room responded to her presence the way a courtroom responds to a judge. The air changed. She wasn't looking at her grandson. She was looking at Amina. And whatever she saw there, something shifted behind her eyes, quiet and irreversible, like a door closing in a very old house. Before we go further, if this kind of story is what you live for, hit that subscribe button right now. New stories drop every week, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Amina had been in Korea for 6 years. She'd come after her father died, a professor who had spent his life savings on her education and left nothing behind but books and an unfinished manuscript. She was 22, heartbroken, and carrying a journalism degree that nobody in Lagos wanted to pay for. A cousin in Busan had offered a floor to sleep on. That became a year of English tutoring, then another year of waitressing, then a placement agency that matched her with the Lee household in Gangnam. The pay was decent. The hours were long. The family barely acknowledged she existed. But Madam Lee had watched her for 2 years. She'd noticed things the others missed. The way Amina reorganized the pantry without being asked and left a handwritten note explaining the new system. The book she always carried in her apron pocket. The way she responded to rudeness, not with tears or anger, but with a composure that looked almost surgical. 3 days after the dinner incident, Madam Lee sent word through the head housekeeper. Amina was to come to the private tea room at 4 o'clock. Amina arrived expecting to be dismissed. She had her resignation mentally drafted. She had even calculated whether her savings could cover 2 months of rent while she looked for a new position. Instead, Madam Lee was sitting at a low wooden table with 2 cups already poured. The tea was Nigerian, black, slightly smoky, and the fact that the old woman had sourced it told Amina everything she needed to know about how long this moment had been planned. "Sit down," the old woman said simply. Amina sat. "What were you reading?" "That night after dinner. I saw you in the garden." Amina blinked. Of all the questions she had prepared for, this was not one of them. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Half of a yellow sundae. Madam Lee considered this. "Is it good?" "It's devastating," Amina said. "And necessary." The old woman looked at her for a long moment with eyes that were still very sharp despite everything the years had done to the rest of her. "Tell me about your father." And something cracked open. Amina talked. She hadn't meant to. She had trained herself not to bring her personal life into this house, but Madame Lee had a quality that was almost unfair. She simply waited, and the silence she made was so patient and so full that words rushed in to fill it. She talked about the professor who read her newspaper editorials at the breakfast table and argued with her about every sentence. She talked about watching him grade papers by candlelight during power cuts. She talked about coming home from university once to find he had given her bedroom to a student who had nowhere to go, and that she had been furious, and that years later she understood it was the most important thing she had ever witnessed. She talked about the manuscript he never finished, a cultural history of West African storytelling traditions, and how she'd been quietly working to complete it in her spare time for 3 years. Writing in longhand on the bus to work and on her lunch break in the kitchen corridor. Madame Lee listened without interrupting. When Amina finally stopped, the old woman refilled their cups and said, "My grandson believes that the measure of a person is their output. Revenue. Rankings. Results." She paused. "I built this family on a different philosophy. He has forgotten that. Or perhaps he never learned it." Amina said nothing. "You're not angry with him," Madame Lee observed. "It wasn't a question." "I don't have the luxury of anger," Amina said carefully. "And honestly, I feel sorry for him. He humiliated me in front of 40 people, and not a single one of them said a word. Not one person at that table looked uncomfortable. That's not his failure alone. That's what a whole environment does to a person over time." Madame Lee looked at her with an expression that Amina could not fully read, something between satisfaction and grief, like a woman confirming a diagnosis she had already made. "Imagine living in a world where no one ever tells you that you're wrong," Amina added quietly. Madame Lee was quiet for a very long time. "Come back on Thursday," she finally said. Min-Jae noticed it on a Wednesday. He came home from a board meeting for hours of quarterly projections and a CFO who kept making the same mistake and apologizing for it, to find his grandmother's tea room door closed. Laughter came from behind it. Not his grandmother's formal social laugh, but something genuine and low. When the door opened, Amina walked out carrying an empty tray and wearing an expression he couldn't name. Not happiness exactly. Something more like the look a person gets after a conversation that confirmed something they had hoped was true. It happened again on Friday. And the following Monday. He cornered the head housekeeper in the hallway. "What does my grandmother want with her?" The housekeeper gave him a careful look, the kind of careful look that experienced household staff perfect over decades of working around volatile wealth. "They talk, sir." "About what?" "I don't know." Madame Lee asked not to be disturbed. "She asked not to be disturbed," he repeated slowly. "She's been running a household for 40 years, and she's asking not to be disturbed by someone who works here." "Yes, sir." He didn't pursue it. But something lodged in his chest that he couldn't identify, something that wasn't quite jealousy and wasn't quite unease, but lived somewhere between the two. That evening, from his study window, he watched Amina cross the garden below. She was carrying her usual book. She sat on the stone bench near the magnolia tree, crossed her legs, and disappeared into the pages without looking up once. He stood at the window for longer than he intended. And when he finally sat back down at his desk, he found he couldn't remember what he'd been working on. It was a Thursday evening, 2 weeks later, when he found her there again. He told himself he was going out for air. He hadn't planned to stop near the bench. But then he saw the cover of the book she was reading and surprised himself by speaking. "That's not Adichie." Amina looked up. If she was startled, she hid it well. "No, it's Frantz Fanon, the wretched of the earth." He recognized the spine. "That's a bit heavy for a Thursday." "It's actually lighter than most of what happens in that house on a Thursday," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. He looked at the bench, then at her, then at the space beside her. She didn't move over. He sat down anyway, keeping deliberate distance. "My grandmother speaks very highly of you," he said. She's a remarkable woman. Yes. A pause. She doesn't usually speak highly of people. Amina turned a page. Maybe she usually doesn't meet people worth speaking highly of. Min-Jae looked at her. Is that a comment about me? If it applies, she said pleasantly. He was quiet. The garden smelled of jasmine and distant rain. Somewhere in the house, someone was playing piano, badly, slowly, the same phrase repeated. What do you actually want? He asked abruptly. Not from this house. From your life. Amina closed the book slowly. I want to finish my father's manuscript. I want to build something that documents the stories of African and Asian cultural overlap, all the history that gets ignored because it doesn't fit any country's national narrative. She looked at him sideways. I want to matter. Not to impress anyone. Just to have done something real. Min-Jae absorbed this. And you think working here gets you closer to that? I think survival is the prerequisite for everything else, she said. I don't have the option of grand ambition without a salary. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, exactly. More like the first crack in a very old wall. You're not what I expected, he said finally. You didn't expect anything, she corrected. You didn't think about me at all. That's rather the point. He had no answer for that. He went back inside without saying goodbye. But that night, for the first time in a long time, he didn't open his laptop. Over the next 3 weeks, something changed quietly, almost invisibly, the way weather changes before a storm. Min-Jae started leaving the study earlier. He started appearing in the garden in the evenings, always with some excuse, a phone call, a walk, a glass of water. Amina never acknowledged the pattern. She just kept reading. But she answered when he asked questions. And he asked more questions than she expected. Do you think wealth creates a different kind of loneliness? He asked one evening out of nowhere. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything, without rushing to reassure him. I think any kind of isolation does. Yours just has better furniture and more people willing to pretend they don't see it. He laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised, like it had escaped without permission. He looked almost embarrassed by it. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing you can give a child is consequence-free power, Amina said. He said it produces a specific kind of person. Smart enough to succeed. Isolated enough to never understand why it matters. Min-Jae was quiet for a long time. The garden hummed around them, insects, distant traffic, the soft percussion of the fountain near the east wall. Is that what you think I am? Amina looked at him directly. It was something she had noticed made him slightly uncomfortable, direct eye contact from someone who owed him deference. I think you're someone who was handed a version of the world that was missing several important pages, she said. And I think part of you knows it, which is why you keep coming out here. I come out here for the air. You have 5 floors of this house and a rooftop terrace, she said. You come out here for the conversation. He had absolutely no response to that. He looked away, jaw working slightly, and then said, quietly, he sounds like someone my grandmother would have liked. Your father. He would have argued with her constantly, Amina said. She would have loved it. They sat in the garden until the lights in the house started going off one by one. Neither of them pointed out how long they'd been sitting there. Neither of them got up first. If you're feeling this story, and something tells me you are, drop a comment below right now. Tell me, Team Min-Jae, or does he still have a lot to prove? I read every single one. Madame Lee's health had been declining for months. She hadn't told anyone, not her doctors, not her children, not even Min-Jae, who she loved more than she ever said out loud. She called her lawyer on a Tuesday morning in October. The conversation lasted 2 hours. When it was over, she sat alone in her tea room for a long time, looking at the magnolia tree through the window, thinking about legacy. Not the financial kind. The other kind. She had built an empire from a textile shop in Daegu. She had survived a husband who underestimated her, a recession that broke every competitor around her, and 3 children who had various degrees of ingratitude. She had done all of it on a single principle: see people clearly, and then act on what you see. She had seen Amina clearly. She had seen Min-Jae clearly too, which was why what she was about to do would feel, to him, like a betrayal. But she had stopped worrying about what felt good a long time ago. She picked up her pen and signed the document. She collapsed 3 days later. Min-Jae was the one who found her in the hallway, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt genuine terror, not the calculated fear of a business risk, but the raw, animal terror of losing someone irreplaceable. He sat on the floor of the hallway with her head in his lap while someone called an ambulance, and he kept talking to her in a low voice, calling her Halmoni, the word he hadn't used since he was a child, telling her to stay, just stay. He wasn't done yet. She squeezed his hand once. Then the paramedics arrived and everything became procedure. She was hospitalized. She improved slightly. She managed a phone call in which she told him not to hover, that he was wasting company time. He laughed with relief and she said, "Good. I can hear you again. You've been very flat lately." Flat? Emotionally flat. Like you've been on a long flight. You were getting better. Don't stop. He didn't know what she meant. Then, on a quiet Wednesday night, she slipped away. The house went into mourning in the way powerful houses do, efficiently and expensively, with caterers and black silk and a guest list that needed managing. Condolence calls arrived from companies they did business with, from politicians who owed the Lee family favors, from old women who had known Madame Lee when she still ran the textile shop in Daegu. Min-Jae did not eat for 2 days. Amina brought a tray to his study door on the second night. She didn't knock. She left it outside the door and walked away. When she reached the end of the corridor, she heard the door open. She didn't look back. The will reading was held in the main sitting room, 12 days after the funeral. The family gathered, Min-Jae, his mother, 2 aunts, a cousin who had flown in from Vancouver with an attitude already loaded and ready to fire. The family lawyer, Mr. Choi, sat at the head of the table with a document folder and the expression of a man who has delivered difficult news many times before. Amina had not been invited. She was in the kitchen when the housekeeper told her, quietly, that Madame Lee had requested her presence at the reading. She walked into the sitting room and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Min-Jae looked at her. His expression was unreadable. Mr. Choi began. Standard provisions first, the properties, the pension trusts, the business shares. Then he paused, adjusted his glasses, and said in a measured voice, the final provision pertains to Madame Lee's personal fortune, amounting to 4.3 billion won, and her separately held cultural assets. Everyone leaned forward. Madame Lee directs that a global cultural foundation be established in her name, with a mandate to document and preserve underrepresented cultural histories, with specific attention to African and Asian historical intersections. He cleared his throat. She names Mr. Kim Min-Jae as chairman, and as co-director and executive curator. He looked up. Ms. Amina Okafor. The room detonated. Min-Jae's aunt was on her feet before Mr. Choi finished the sentence. This is absurd. She was a maid. This is... Please. Mr. Choi raised a hand. Madame Lee anticipated this response. She recorded a final message. He opened a laptop. He turned it to face the room. And there she was. Madame Lee, sitting in her tea room, in her ivory robe, looking directly into the camera with that expression that had always made entire boardrooms fall silent. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and dry and entirely like herself. If you are arguing right now, she said, then you are proving my point. Silence. I built this family on a philosophy that most of you abandoned somewhere between your second car and your first board seat. The philosophy is simple. Power without compassion destroys everything it touches. I have watched my grandson become brilliant and become cold. I have watched this family confuse wealth with worth. And I have grown very tired of it. She paused, looked at the camera. Amina Okafor came to my house with nothing except intelligence, dignity, and a story she was trying to finish. In 2 years of conversation, she taught me more about the world than most people in my network have in 30. She is not a maid. She never was. She was simply the only person in this house who was seen for less than she was. Min-Jae's jaw was tight. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at the table. Min-Jae. Her voice sharpened. I love you. I have always loved you. But love without honesty is indulgence, and I have indulged you enough. The foundation is my correction. Not a punishment, a direction. If you want to be the leader I raised you to be, then learn from the woman you once disrespected. She knows things you do not. And you are smart enough to know it. She looked at the camera one last time. Don't waste it. The screen went black. No one spoke for almost a full minute. Then Min-Jae's aunt began again, quieter now but no less sharp. This will be contested. You're welcome to try, Mr. Choi said mildly. Madam Lee's legal team anticipated that as well. The documentation is airtight. The cousin from Vancouver whispered something to his mother. Min-Jae's mother was staring at the table with an expression that might have been grief or might have been calculation. It was hard to tell with her. Min-Jae stood up. I need air, he said. He walked out of the sitting room, through the kitchen, and into the garden. Amina was already there. She was standing near the magnolia tree, her arms crossed against the October chill, looking up at the branches. She'd left the sitting room 3 minutes before him. He stopped a few feet away. They stood in silence for a long time. The house lights came on behind them, casting long shadows across the garden path. I didn't know, Amina said quietly. About the will. She never told me. I believe you, Min-Jae said. She turned to look at him, surprised by the absence of accusation in his voice. He was looking at the tree. His face was not the closed, cold face she'd learned to read in the early months. It was something else. Stripped. Tired. Very young, suddenly, in a way that powerful men almost never allowed themselves to appear. She was right, he said. About everything she said in there. I know that. He paused. That doesn't make it comfortable. No, Amina agreed. The truth usually isn't. He turned to face her then. And for the first time, he looked at her the way she had always looked at him, really looked, without the filter of hierarchy or assumption or carefully maintained distance. I want to apologize, he said. Not for the will. For the dinner. For the way I treated you that night, and for the 2 years before it when I treated you like furniture. He exhaled. I've been apologizing to people my whole life with the wrong currency. Gestures. Money. Restructuring deals to make up for bad behavior. I don't want to do that this time. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. That's all. Just, I'm sorry. Amina looked at him for a long time. She told me once, Amina said slowly, that the measure of a person isn't how they act when everything is going well. It's what they do the first time it costs them something to be decent. Min-Jae was quiet. This costs you something, she said. Saying that to me, out here, without an audience. That's not nothing. It's not enough, he said. No, she agreed. But it's a start. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere above them, a window opened and then closed again. The magnolia tree moved faintly in the wind. She left me a letter, Amina said. A personal one, separate from the legal documents. I haven't opened it yet. What are you waiting for? Amina looked up at the sky. Courage, I suppose. Min-Jae sat down on the stone bench. He looked at the space beside him. After a moment, Amina sat down too. Not a billionaire and his employee. Not an heir and a maid. Not a man performing contrition and a woman performing grace. Just 2 people in a garden, in the cold, at the beginning of something that hadn't been named yet, changed, both of them, by a small woman in an ivory robe who had seen them clearly and decided, in her last act, to make them see each other. If this story moved you, if you felt something in that last scene, then you already know what to do. Like this video. Subscribe so you never miss a story. And leave a comment telling me what Madam Lee's letter said. I want to read your versions. The best one gets featured next week. See you in the next one.